Go ahead.
Hey, comrades and relatives, welcome back. This is a very special episode of our limited series, YOTED. You might have tuned into our last episode of YOTED, which was recorded, almost over a year ago. This is a limited series that Nick, myself, and some other comrades conceived as a way to talk about trending conspiracy theories, essentially, and as a way to provide, our breakdown from the perspective of, a native person, of lefties, and breaking down, a material analysis. And so we've talked about, the conspiracy theories that were popular in the 60s and 70s. We talked about the well-known book Chaos. Talked a little bit about Charles Manson stuff.
There was a Epstein episode.
The Epstein episode.
Yeah. Hey guys, for our listeners, can you tell us what YOTED means?
Yeah.
Just for our new listeners and anyone who needs a refresher about what it is to get lost in the sauce.
To get lost in this YOTED. Okay. Well, it is derived from peyote. which is a serious and real medicine that a lot of Native people use. And it should be protected. It should be taken seriously. And so when we're saying YOTED, we're referring to a lot of the time white folks, not always white folks, but non-Native folks who take indigenous spiritual practices out of their context and just get weird and do inappropriate, weird, bizarre things. So the way we arrived at using this term within Red Nation,
it was during the conception of the Red Deal.
Yeah, it took place in this very here office where we're recording at the Larry Kassouf Freedom Center. So as you know, the Red Deal was written by huge groups of people, right? We got community input. So we were having a big Red Deal writing session. There was like 70 people here packed into this little office. And a lady pulls up, and she pulls aside our comrade Nick, right? A well-known Lakota scholar. She had been following him, and she starts to say the most outlandish, racist, offensive shit. Trying to talk to Nick about Lakota spirituality. And at one point, she claims that she was offered to go on a peyote journey with another person we knew, who's also known for engaging in these bizarre antics. And she said, yeah, I did peyote, what was it, for 2 months? She's like,
for 40 days
for 40
and
days.
40 nights.
She did peyote every day for 40 days and 40 nights. Wild white woman. And the conclusion she came to after these 40 days and 40 nights was that she was the white buffalo calf woman. It's awful if you know the context. It's just profoundly inappropriate thing to say, especially to someone like Nick. And so immediately he's offended, tells her to leave. And from then on, that became like our inside joke. Like, this woman was literally YOTED.
She was YOTED.
Far gone.
Also, with the, going back to like where the word comes from to describe peyote, which is an actual medicine, right? And we have been using the word YOTED to describe people who are just far gone, lost in the sauce, attempting to explain or attempting to, I guess, utilize medicine. And so that's like what the core of today's episode is going to be about, is about these people who are like almost there in what they believe, but then is ultimately, sadly, what we're describing as the ultimate like spiritual identity that can be achieved by people who have become so detribalized and so removed from their people and their lands and their humanity, to the point where they're claiming to be actual deities and actual holy beings that we believe in, like white buffalo calf woman. And you know who else was claiming to be white buffalo calf woman?
Tell us who.
Some know her by the name Mother God. And actually, her real name is actually at a loss for me. I don't remember her name. Had to have been something like, Jessica or something.
It was like Anna or Amy. Let me look this up.
Maybe it was Amy. But okay, so this, while Jen's getting that, I came across
Amy Carlson.
Okay. I came across this documentary on HBO, and I've been telling all the comrades of Red Nation, you got to see this. Like, it was just unbelievable, the like delusions that these like people have fallen into simply because they are I don't know, they're just so far gone and lost, like so. But before we get to that, before we go through like what happened in these documentaries, we also have another one we're going to talk about, which sort of links this like whole connection to settler identity and politics and how they exist in the time of now.
The alt-right pipeline.
Yeah, the people who get red pilled, basically. But Jen has a really great I guess analysis of just history. Do you want to go into what we were talking about earlier?
About what?
Edward Said?
Oh yeah, okay. So yeah, this has to do with right, like disconnection from community, from kinship, right? Like thinking about the formation of settler identity and how it leads one to then cling on to these like really false and bizarre notions of spirituality as a way to kind of reclaim this meaning of the self and life. And what it makes me think about is I go back to Edward Said thinking about Orientalism, where he states that the Occidental, right, referring to Europe, the US, the West, North America, the West, right, that they, these powers, which would then go on to become like top imperialist powers, they formed their identity only on the basis of they formed their identity on the basis of comparing themselves with the Oriental, right, with the exotic, with the other. And so in that, Said makes the argument that the identity of the Occident and the Occidental is dependent on an ever-existing other or exotic person or place, right? And that the settler, and he's not using the term settler specifically, right? But, he's a Palestinian scholar. He is talking about making critiques of settler colonialism, settler colonial projects, and the settler identity. And so from there, we see that the settler creates their identity, right? The Occidental creates its identity by way of dehumanizing the other and also dehumanizing the self, even if it's placing the self in a position of superiority. And that makes me think about what Fanon had to say about the colonizer and the colonized and the relationship between the colonizer and the colonized. And so Fanon says, the colonizer is not any more human because they place themselves in this position of superiority. It is precisely because they do that they continue to dehumanize themselves, right, while dehumanizing the colonized. And that within these logics of settler colonialism, within these creations of settler identity, there is no access to humanity for oneself, right? And so with these instances of what we're calling settler spirituality, we're basically identifying them as attempts to regain humanity, attempts to regain an identity that isn't inherently based off of consumption, even though, in the instances that we're going to talk about, right, in the instances of the New Age to alt-right pipeline, they're solely products of individualism. They're not the people who do these things, like the QAnon shaman that famously took over the imagery of the January 6th Capitol takeover. They're doing this purely out of individualism. And in fact, in the New Age to alt-right spaces, you are seeing people fighting for the right to maintain a lack of accountability to a greater purpose, right? It is based in such inherent individualism. And settler spirituality is always serving to uphold the status quo, no matter how subversive they claim it is, right? These are people who are anti-government, anti-authoritarian. These are people who want liberty and, the freedom of spirituality. But, the status of settlers playing Indian, demanding access to indigenous spirituality is a core part of projects of imperialism and settler colonialism, right? Patrick Wolf reminds us that the highest stage of settler colonialism is when the settler attempts to assert themselves as the new native. And that's why, going back to the example of the Boston Tea Party, this idea of playing Indian, and from there, various patriotic societies were created in the image of natives, right? Thinking about the famous example of the Boy Scouts, these various hippie communes that formed in the 60s and 70s trying to emulate what they thought was an indigenous way of life. Many of them still exist in places like Taos, New Mexico, a notorious place for cult activity. They're right in the middle of Tiwa lands, northern Tiwa lands, and it's something we deal with. It's a huge deal in New Mexico. It's a huge deal. Wealthy white people coming from all over for retreats, resorts for these exclusive spiritual retreats, stealing land, stealing water, stealing resources. And so we know that the link between upholding a settler identity and this appropriation of Native spirituality, it's not contradictory. They're not contradictory. In fact, they have always been co-constitutive, at least as Natives understand it. This co-optation of indigeneity or spirituality as a means of asserting a settler identity, right, for themselves. And yeah, now I kind of want to go back and get into these two documentaries that we watched recently that we think just really put on display exactly what we're talking about. And the way they just say it all themselves, I think it's fascinating. So the one we wanted to get into was that one. It's called Love Has Won, The Cult of Mother God. Came out in 2023. You want to give us a breakdown of that?
Sure. Just what I can remember off the top of my head, I watched it a couple weeks ago, so excuse me if I'm like misspeaking a little bit, but generally there was a white woman. What was her name again? I already forgot.
I hear it. Amy Carlson.
Amy, okay. And this Amy person, ultimately, she ends up creating a cult based off of her being this mother god. And she was able to rake in really just troubled people who wanted a place to belong, who needed a place to live, who were also on the same level of like hippy dippy ideology that they were on.
But like not even necessarily, right? She pulls it. People entered her cult through all different ways, which is
yeah. So okay, so how she herself got into the whole new age spirituality was through ecstasy. She had never felt like whatever ecstasy makes you feel like, and from there she just is totally removed from I guess like what they refer to as like the material world, and she ends up marrying another hippie, and then she ends up with another hippie, and then from there she starts talking on YouTube and gets a internet following, and then she links up with other people who are on the same wave as her, and eventually she links up with a guy who has a marketing perspective, and he's like, well, let's call it Love Has Won. And so Love Has Won gained a large internet following.
It's like a business too, right? They're like selling products like soaps and shit.
Eventually,
Oh,
it starts
okay.
off as donations at first.
Wow.
Where they're asking random people on the internet, please donate to our cause. And so eventually they create a gathering, and then that's like kind of where like the core group begins. And so then that's when they're like live streaming all the time and raking in donations, and then they're incentivized by money and to keep weed on the table to begin selling their stupid potions, which are poison.
Right.
And
right.
so eventually there's another character that gets introduced, and he is the father god, and he is just like the craziest looking character. Like, he is not wearing a shirt. He has long, beautiful hair.
Stop.
It looks so shiny.
He looks so fucking gross. It's like you could smell him through the screen.
It was gross. So he had like minis with like Fireball on the like, they bought him pizza. They're at a roadside motel. And he's just so lost in the sauce with himself. And he also believes that he is the father god. He believes that he killed the mother god by draining her energy, which everyone in this cult seems to agree that's what he did. But like, come on, like, they're like, it doesn't have to be so hokey. Like, he literally, like, you don't have to be so hokey to acknowledge that this like fucking abuser comes into your house and like fucking kills you by making you spiral into the pits that she did. But yeah, so that's kind of that's what happened, and it ultimately ends up with her and her cult keeping her alive.
So, okay, well, real backtracking, for a quick sec. The whole basis of this cult is just partying all the time. She becomes an alcoholic. She gets cirrhosis. She starts dying. And that's how she dies.
They use the poison potions,
which is colloidal silver. It's not for human consumption.
No, yeah, and they're using it to alleviate her cirrhosis, and it doesn't work. It makes it worse. And yeah, so and they're partying all the time because she's like creating these like delusions to everyone that she's using these tools to connect with God. And oh my god, that's even the craziest part too. She's also supposedly talking a direct connection to God, but also other people who have passed away, like Robin Williams. And then they're like, oh, but wait, there's also living ones too, like Donald Trump. She has Donald Trump as her list of people who she's connected with. And it's so funny because they're like, oh, she's gonna connect with them, and like, she's clearly just passed out, like on her bed, like passed out from drinking and smoking and partying. And
kind of narrowing it out though, I mean, she makes these claims that she claims she's White Buffalo Catwoman. She claimed that she was Pele, the goddess. They fucking Kanaka people booted her cult off their land. It was badass. The mayor got involved. The mayor delivered a decree. Where were they? Where were they? Were they in Maui? To look up exactly.
Yeah, let me look it up, because if it was in Maui, that's fucking crazy.
It might have been. Yeah.
Let me see. Hawaii Mother God, Google.
But, goes to show what happens when you make those claims, and you're posted up on Native people's lands. Let's see. In Kauai, that's where they were.
Yeah.
But yeah, they got kicked out. There was huge protests right outside the place that they were staying, led by Kanaka people and allies. They the city literally booted them out because of the disrespectful ass claims that were being made. soon after she died.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And she was it seemed like in the end she was like desperate to like maintain control over this cult. So she was coming up with these new stories about how these like crazy things were going to happen. Like she said that there was going to be a hole in the ocean, and so that's why they had to go to Hawaii. And in all of that, I believe her family was trying to rescue her, and they ended up calling Dr. Phil for help, thinking that they would actually like help her. And they basically just exploited her story and used it for what it was. And that's when Kanakamale like finds out that she is on their island. And during what seemed like a short amount of time she was there, she again adopts a new native identity to claim.
Yeah.
Not even identity, like deity to claim. Like,
yeah.
So fucked up. It was so gross, but that was the best part. I was not prepared for that.
Yeah.
I was
something
not,
so badass.
They leave it on a cliffhanger, and like you see your car just like all bashed, and like the aunties are just like, "Go take care of your kids."
Yup.
I was like, "Let's go."
It was dope. I was like, that's exactly what happens. Every white person should know that that's what's gonna happen to you. You're gonna get your shit rocked. I wish natives here were like that. Once again,
too,
I'm wishing we were taking notes from Kanaka people instead of letting them into our homes on feast day when they're doing disgusting shit, making a mockery of our ways, taking notes at what they see at our feast days, and having the audacity to act like our friends.
Yeah. No. In the last years of the Boy Scouts of America, like thank God they like are not an organization anymore, but I had such a hard time like convincing other Pueblo people to be angry about them, and I had such a hard time like being like, why are you not angry about this?
Right. And the common response is like, oh, haha, like, just don't pay attention to it. Haha. And to me, that just only shows like you don't think that justice can be served. You don't think you deserve justice. You're not willing to stand up for yourself. You're not willing to protect the things that we hold most sacred. And why not? Do you think the damage is done?
Like you're
it's
unwilling.
Not worth stopping.
That moment in the Mother God story, I wasn't expecting that. I wasn't expecting to see indigenous people boot this fucking cult the hell out of their island and their lands. But what that also showed me is that it's always going to be the indigenous people to like clean up this mess, to like create sense, to like maintain a material clarity in our own lands. And like we know these places are sacred, like we know why, and we know the stories, we have the connection, and like we defend that sacredness in all of its like pure form, and not this and like don't allow this perversion to happen. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like it also brought me to like another thought of how it's indigenous people who make up 80% of the world's biodiversity,
and who protect 80% of the world's biodiversity. Yeah.
Well, yeah. And it was just like a surprising angle to it was. I was just surprised to like have those thoughts while watching the documentary.
Yeah.
And then it brought me to like a more, I don't know, sometimes I'll just like get on like Hulu or HBO, whatever platform is available at the time, and I seemingly just am like, well, let's see what white people are up to today.
See, it's hard for me to take interest in white people shit. I'm mostly just disgusted and don't like avert my gaze. But it's important to explore their ideology. It's important to look at how it got here, right? Like that's what we do, and like we're hoping this episode can kind of get into that, like.
Yeah, so then and that's exactly what I've been on for a few weeks, because the next documentary I ran into was You Can't Kill Meme. And I've heard about what they talk about before, but not to the extent and level that is talked about in the doc. So we all know about the Pepe Frog meme. I always knew that it was an alt-right meme, and the alt-right was using it as I just knew it was popular amongst them, and I knew that there was an alt-right group on 4chan, or that's where they meet up, I guess, on the internet. And I knew that they're all Trump supporters, but I didn't realize the extent of the this artificial spirituality that they take it to. So in this documentary, it starts off with the filmmaker talking about the alt-right and 4chan and the Pepe Frog, and back in, I think it was like the early 2000s, sometimes like pre-memes, like you remember the first of memes when it was like what are they called, like the early memes? I don't remember.
And they were like based off of motivational, they were parroting motivational posters, those kinds of memes.
Yeah. Gosh, I wish I could name a couple of them, but you know which ones they're talking about. But anyways, but prior to that era, there was this person who wrote a book about like meme magic. And I guess it's like a branch of chaos magic, whatever all that is. I've heard about like these like brands of magic like on TikTok and just various places on the internet, but hadn't really like looked into it. And so that's what this book is. And it's like a specific form of this meme magic where they're basically using a symbol and image over and over again to create their reality, which to me just sounds like that's just like basic prayer, really. Like in a really perverted way. And like, they this collective, this alt-right collective meets up on the internet, and they like essentially pray for something to happen, and then are totally yoted when the thing happens. Like they never experienced like the power of creator or anything. Like they yeah. And so basically why Pepe the Frog is so important in all of this is because they call him Kek, which is also an Egyptian, or no. I don't know. So at some point, the phrase LOL was replaced with the word Kek, K-E-K. And then Kek also happens to be an Egyptian deity, which was like a chaos deity or trickster, or just and he was also represented by a frog. So then they started calling the Pepe Frog, and they started using Pepe and as a Kek deity. And so yeah, they use that to do their weird meme prayer, so much so to the point where seemingly they were successful at making Hillary Clinton collapse as she was getting into one of her cars. But I'm just like, if you have like hundreds of people wishing like some whack ass energy over and over again, it's gonna happen. Like, we know this, and that's what Jen was saying, and we were laughing about. It's like, these fools are a millennia behind.
Not one,
several millennias behind all of humanity.
But not only that, like, yeah, dude, in terms of like listening to these white people, white men mostly, like who subscribe to, you know, everything from nihilism to Satanism to types of anarchism and, you know, right-wing libertarianism, talking about their like first experiences with quote unquote spirituality via these alt-right channels where they're, you know, manifesting and doing what they're calling magic. And I'm like, first of all, like this speaks to how extremely removed these people are from anything that it shows the extent of like their disconnection, their displacement, their dehumanization, but it's also showing like a very sad attempt to form a spirituality from the bile that is settler colonialism, right? From the nothingness, from the death drive, right? Mm-hmm. They're trying to form a spirituality from the evilest shit this world has ever known and seen. And which makes sense. That's the logical extent of what spirituality for the settler could possibly mean in this world. And like I said, like the crossover between New Age spirituality and alt-right ideology is not a contradiction. It's not an exception. They have always been co-constitutive. And so, I don't know, it's very funny like to hear, and I won't go into detail. Obviously, we're not going into detail about any of this, but like hearing the things these white people are saying to the ears of Native people, to the ears of Indigenous people anywhere who have maintained their connections, their knowledge, their life ways to these things, it's really sad, right? Like to see what happens to a person who doesn't have these things, who doesn't have access to this knowledge, and how they attempt to create it, and how they think they're so smart, how they think they're so enlightened. It's pathetic and it's dehumanizing. They continue that process of furthering the dehumanization of themselves and of others. And so what is settler spirituality but a way of trying to make metaphysics from the evil that is settler colonialism and imperialism and white supremacy and heteropatriarchy, you know? And I believe that like these people then can become instruments to produce this evil. And I'm not saying this from a solely like, you know, spiritual, metaphysical perspective. I'm talking about the material outcome, right? Mm-hmm. What happens to people who are lost, right? How do people end up in a cult? I don't think they're just stupid. I don't think they're just ignorant. I think these are like hurt, downtrodden people who are in many cases deserving of justice, right? I don't think that, you know, especially when we're talking about something like Jonestown, right? Those were mostly Black and brown women and children. We can't just say, oh, they were ignorant, they were stupid, they deserved it. No, they were coerced, they were brainwashed, right? Just like anyone who joins this, because what cult leaders, especially those who are pandering to people who are seeking out a spirituality or a reclamation of an identity to white folks or to anybody who's off their path, not just white folks, but anyone who has lost this connection, they're going to play on that in very cruel and deceptive ways. And it's not a coincidence that we're seeing the rise in the popularity of settler spirituality, which reinforces the ideology of things like the QAnon movement, that reinforces, you know, hateful and fascist ideology. And so I think that when we're talking about quote unquote settler spirituality, I think a lot of, you know, white folks are inclined to ask, well, then what is there for us? And not just white folks, like detribalized people everywhere. Like sadly, I've seen this reach for the new age alt-right pipeline happening pretty it's pretty widespread across non-white communities. I see it happening amongst Native people, amongst Black and brown folks, right? We're all familiar with how that goes, right? And how, you know, people of color have their own brands of this, right? Like there's several examples that come to mind that I'm not gonna, you know,
it deserves its own episode.
Yeah. And so this isn't just a settler thing or a white people thing. Anyone who has become disconnected from a community with the common core values, culture, and spirituality is gonna be vulnerable to cults like this, and to ideologies that really suck you into standing beside some really hateful, bigoted, and belligerent things. Especially when you don't have accountability to like people as a whole or a broader community, you know?
Exactly. No, all of that was so spot on. Yeah. Sorry, I'm trying to think like what to add, like or where to go. You said so much because all of that is true, and it's like the ultimate form of settler individuality too.
Enough to make someone claim to be God.
Yeah.
Right. Which is literally dehumanization. To claim you're no longer human by way of transcending humanity. Right? Like,
yeah, no. Oh man, that shit was crazy.
I caution other Native people to look out when we see some of this coming up in, like, not necessarily our circles, but I do kind of see this weird, almost pretending-esque vibe accepted in, like, the art community amongst Natives, the cinema community, the music community. Like, people are hesitant to be critical, you know, of these things. And I'm like, no, dude, like, we really, really have to keep that on lock. And like, we can't allow anybody to come in our spaces with weird hippy dippy nonsense. We can't allow detribalized and reconnecting people to have the authority on these things, because that is exactly how you get these bizarre ideologies introduced into our circles, especially amongst young people. Like, I see it way too frequently. I see it destroy movements. I see it destroy political momentum. And again, it's going back to the identity politics.
Damn. No, that's absolutely spot on. I've had so many things examples going through my head. The worst part about this episode is that we can't say too much out loud.
But if you know, you know, right? And this isn't.
It's a if you know, you know.
And like, I'm sure
basis.
white people are listening to this, right? Like the other day, we actually got an email saying like, I'm going to do an episode about a breakdown of like, you know, white people. And I'm like, we don't really center white people in the podcast. This one, I guess we are to some extent, but really, like, I'm hoping that Native folks are listening and picking up. I hope, you know, they're picking up what we're putting down, because this isn't really for white people to comprehend entirely, right? If it helps you ruminate on your own identity or spirituality, cool. But this is more talking about how white people's obsession with ruminating on their identity or spirituality causes more problems than anything.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you sort of helping me digest what I saw in these documentaries. 'Cause I really appreciate the analysis, because I'm still just like, holy shit. Like, this is their ultimate form. This is them trying to make a desperate attempt to claim humanity, their own humanity, and it's just coming out in such fucked up ass ways. Like, just what you were saying earlier. It's like it's reflective of the settler state, and we all know what that shit is.
And the artifice of the settler state and the mask of the settler state, right?
Yeah.
Our last podcast, our guest had a powerful quote saying, the mask of the US is falling off. And it makes sense to me that there's such an uptick in these, you know, new age spiritual movements as an attempt to keep that mask on, as an attempt to grasp at any kind of cover for, you know, the utter nothingness, the absence of identity, the absence of humanity that is the settler and the settler state. They're not marred by, you know, abundance or superiority in that way. They are. Their burden is absence, right?
It reminds me of when me and Dee were at the Super Bowl, at the change the name protest, and I'm not sure if very many people saw it or knew about it, but we're sort of what seemed like a designated protest area. And right next to us, or all around us, basically on both corners, were these. D said he thinks that they're YouTubers who were filming themselves, chanting like, basically, um preaching to the passerbyers that God hates the Super Bowl. God is unimpressed with the Super Bowl. And then they have like their big old signs that says like God hates this, God hates feminists, God hates, just everybody basically.
Yeah.
But like just to like poke at them and to like sort of just to like just fuck with them. I was like, how come you don't say that God hates racism? And like his head might have just exploded in that moment. But like if you're, I was like, nothing about that is consistent. Like none of it. Like how can you say, I don't know. But I mean, I know this is stupid. I know that like it's like nothing to argue with. But I just think it's so funny, like how, not funny, but like everything that you're saying, just how it is just, it's just settler identity.
Just settler identity. And settler identity, first and foremost, is premised on Indian killing, right? The status of an Indian killer, that is the basis of a settler identity, right? Mm-hmm. That's the first thing a settler is, mm-hmm. right? And I also want to like take it back to like, oh, so, people are, so white people are just irredeemable, or tribalized people are just irredeemable. There's no hope. No, that's not what we're saying. We're saying don't do weird shit. Like,
so one of the things about the alt-right that I also found kind of like interesting is the whole like Pepe 4chan people, their whole thing is that they're a response to the establishment, and they are disenfranchised peoples by the liberals, and they're basically just like mad about being poor whites. And how, I'm sorry, where was I going with this? I spent so much thought and thinking back to the documentary.
I'm thinking more about class. They fail to recognize their class status.
Yeah. Oh, okay, yeah. That's what I was trying to get at. It's like these are very like material and economic problems, but then they're taking it to like a really like fucking stupid ass like fascist place. Like one of them was like, we live in a society where they're talking about just I don't know, just like, killing babies or whatever, but then they're like not giving a shit about like all the babies being killed in Gaza or being left in the hospital, or they're being like they're basically saying like something has to change with the government. And so that's why they're like going into this whole chaos magic, is because it's like a desperation to change the material conditions, the political conditions in the US. And I'm just like, but if that's what you like, but if that's really what you wanted to do, then why wouldn't you just like believe indigenous socialists?
Why wouldn't you just organize? Like
they will just simply organize. Yeah,
they'll do anything but organize. Join a fucking union. Oh, you like fucking join a John Brown Breakfast Club.
But they think like they can shit post their way into making things happen,
which again is going back to that deep individualism. They would rather be a warlock. They would rather be a god, right?
Yeah.
Than be a sane and caring and compassionate human being. And I think that's another thing too, is like, these poor whites, mostly poor white men, they have these same grievances as us, right? Socialists, native socialists, right?
Yeah. They have more in common with us than billionaires.
And any day of the week. And like, but what they're really fighting for is they want to see a world in which, we're not dealing with neoliberalism, right? We're not dealing with like, a repressive ass economic system, but they want to achieve that while still maintaining their individualism. And I noticed that is the big difference between the average socialist and like the right-wing conservative or the right-wing libertarian, is we can agree on all the marks, right? Up until it comes to, okay, but you have to care about other people. You have to be willing to give to other people. You have to be willing to have some empathy and compassion. And that's when they're like, fuck no, I will die before I do that.
Literally. No, yeah, exactly. Like, even further than that, like, ultimately they go to this fucking YOTED ass fucking place because it's the only thing that like keeps white supremacy in order.
Yeah.
Like there are no people of color on these documentaries. Like there was one on the meme one, and that was really sad because he was a black veteran, and he was so close. So close. It was so sad, man. Like, he was so close to have, but you know.
And there's nothing more sad, I think, when you see somebody who is so close to getting it right. They know imperialism is wrong. They know that the government lies to us and will harm us any day of the week. They acknowledge the lies. They see through the bullshit. But instead of, taking up an anti-imperialist analysis, instead of looking at history, instead of looking at where resistance has been successful historically, they want to feel so important that they have reinvented the wheel and they have a new solution because their ideas are just so powerful on their own, because they're men who have innovation and creativity to bring to the world. They would do anything to maintain that self-importance. That's why they don't bother to look at history. They don't bother to look at other people around the world. They don't bother to be in solidarity with people, because ultimately, they're protecting their right to be entirely selfish, and they'd kill and die for it. And they would throw anybody and anything under the bus to maintain it, right? And there's no way we're going to get to a world where you truly have freedom or liberty as long as everybody's out here at each other's throats. And that's where you get kind of into the nihilist rabbit hole, or the nihilist branch of this, where it's like, I don't have an obligation to care about other people. Like, it's insignificant in the grand scheme of things. You get the Rick and Morty bros on the scene who are like, nothing even really matters. There's no point in me, being a good person in this life, because at the end of the day, everything's meaningless. And like, they think they're so fucking smart for having a absolutely simplistic and infantile analysis. Like, it's crazy. But like, what was I getting at? So in that way, not only is this manifestation of settler spirituality completely antithetical to building relationality amongst people in general, and literally with your own self, like, it literally disconnects you from your own self. Like, these are fucking soulless people, right? Who are attempting to create a purpose for themselves, a soul, like the mother god woman. Like, at one point in the documentary, people were recalling how she would kind of come to these moments where she was like, what if I'm lying to all of you? What if all of this is made up?
No, in the end, that's what she was saying.
Yeah, and she was dying.
She was telling her cult, like, no, I'm not God. And then her cult was so lost in the sauce that they're basically saying that, like, that's the pain and suffering of humanity being expelled through her body, and that's why she's entering these like delusional places. But it's really like
the absence of delusion.
Yeah, dude, it's literally the most rational thing she says.
Yep.
That she's like, I'm not God.
And like, fuck, everything's just upside down. It's backwards. Like, you always hear us saying this, backwards. Settler society is backwards. Settler identity is backwards. The way in which they conceive of progress is literally backwards. Like, all life on this planet as we know it is on the verge of fucking extinction, and to them it is the highest form of progress and success and innovation. Like, it is death driven, and therefore their spirituality is rooted in death, right? It is rooted in every evil this world has known. Like, and the thing is, though, kind of getting back to that point I was making, does this mean like white people or detribalized people or settlers just irredeemable? No, it's not. And you know what? One particular white person has been on my mind a lot these past few weeks. I'm sure he's probably been on your mind too. Aaron Bushnell, right? To me, he showed us what it means for a white person, for a settler who found himself actively in the ranks of the US military, right? A foot soldier of US imperialism. What he showed us was the most profound reclamation of humanity for himself. Like, I don't know if people understand how powerful the message he was sending was and how much he thought about it. And I said this in the last episode, the prospect that he was, or, you know, to even imply that he was insane is just disgusting. Every part of his action was so well planned out, from the will he wrote, right, asking that his money be given to the children of Gaza, from, you know, the Reddit threads we're seeing of him coming out defending indigenous sovereignty, right? Here, like for Native people here, seeing his position on imperialism, knowing that he did what he did because he was handling classified information about the presence of US soldiers on the ground in Gaza, right? What he did, right? And again, many of us have taboos against suicide, right? Native people, Muslim folks, right? And so a big conversation came about how do we understand what he did from this perspective? And it, to me, is very clear that this is a man who understood that the world he was in was backwards. And he said in his final statement, like, it's the US that set the terms for his suicide.
This is what the ruling class has determined normal.
Is determined the new normal. Yep. That's what the ruling class has determined normal. So what he did, and he says, what I'm doing is not extreme at all compared to what is happening in Palestine. And he's right. When a society is so backwards, something like what he's doing, not only is it the logical outcome, I think it's the highest form of reclaiming your humanity as a settler who found himself in the position he did, right? Like, I believe he did what he did from a place of pure love for humanity, for the world. Like, he's a martyr. He's a martyr who is celebrated and glorified with the ranks of all the other Palestinian martyrs because he understood and was tuned in to exactly what was happening in the world that he was in. Like, so white folks listening, if you're wondering what it means to reclaim your humanity, to really reclaim it, to be a part of this world, to resonate with the people who are most oppressed, learn from the lessons that Aaron left us with, because it was a very intentional message for you, and it was a very intentional message specifically for people in the military, for armed service personnel. That's who he was speaking to, and it's powerful. And I hope that we continue to remember him and glorify him as a martyr, because he taught us a powerful and important lesson in humanity right now, in a world where settlers' attempt to gain or reclaim their humanity is almost always rooted in further settler violence and in furthering the suffering and displacing colonized people. Aaron Bushnell showed us that you don't have to do that. And I'm not saying, you need to commit suicide. Absolutely not. There's so many ways that you can reclaim your humanity and do what's right without doing that. But what his act represents, I think, is just a high form of truly understanding and expressing that humanity to the world.
Absolutely. And shame on anyone who has anything like bad to say about him. I know at one point, I mean, it has to have been like an op or something where they're trying to say like you can't say rest in power about him because he was in the military. It was just like some dumb shit like that. Like how dare you? Same thing with people who are in the military and saying that he like betrayed them and he was a coward for doing so because he's supposed to be completely beholden to the military. Like,
Right, and that is a true act of subversion. To do it in his fatigues, right? Like it was all intentional, completely intentional.
mm-hmm.
I mean, if you know, the resistance in Gaza and the Houthi rebels are holding up pictures of him in their processions proclaiming him as a martyr, that's all I need to know.
Exactly. No, I oh gosh. No, honestly, when I first heard the news about it, like I was kind of in a state of like disbelief. Like I wasn't sure if it was real or not. And it took me actually a couple hours to grasp that this is something that actually happened. And I was I was just so touched. And then, you know, the only thing the when the news first came out, the only thing I was hearing was he said free Palestine as he died. And then a few hours later, you know, there's the video, there's the transcribe of what he said, and I was, gosh, just I was there with everyone. Like I was just so touched by that. And yeah, thank you for saying that, Jen. Like for that analysis of it.
Yeah, like in a world like this, an act like that should not be. We can't push it under the rug. It needs to be amplified, like again and again and again. Um, and that was not the self-immolation we saw this year. There was the one in Atlanta, Georgia, that happened just a few months prior to that.
Yeah.
There was, I still can't find much information about the individual who did that, but we know that this is self-immolation is it is a tactic that has accompanied, you know, radical forms of protest for a long time now, going back to the Vietnam War and even before that. It is an act that has been used to peacefully protest imperialist occupation and violence all over the world. And what is so shocking about it is that for most people, it's seen as a violent act, but there's not violence being done, inflicted upon anyone else but the self. I think just seeing those images of the Israeli embassy, so essentially, right, a IOF officer, right, representing the embassy with his gun aimed at Aaron Bush and all as he was on the ground in flames. Like, that says it all. Those pictures say it all. There's not even words to accompany those pictures because it says everything, not just about that moment, but about our current moment at large. So this is all to say, you know, when push comes to shove, don't spend too much time. Like, we can't afford to have people caught up in their identity and spiritual dilemmas in a world like this, right? We need to be strong for ourselves and for others. And if you had the misfortune of being disconnected or not having these types of traditions in your life, you don't need to resort to extreme, hokey, racist nonsense to reclaim your sense of humanity. And guess what? When you do make an effort to actually make kinship, you're guaranteed to actually find kin, right? Like, we roll with non-native people when they're cool, when they do what's right. Like,
yeah, man. Yeah. We've had white comrades take the ultimate sacrifice for us.
Like on multiple occasions.
On multiple occasions. Yeah.
I guess the last thing I'll say is when it comes to supporting Native people, when it comes to supporting Indigenous people, trying to enter access to the realm of spirituality is not something that is going to be guaranteed, and is many times not appropriate at all. And what you experience in one place, don't expect it elsewhere. Don't expect to be invited into circles at every turn. And for the Native folks and the non-white folks listening, watch your back, because the most manipulative people, you know, we can have all of our politics down. We could be smart, thoughtful, insightful, critical people. Sometimes these people still make it into our circles. So be conscious, be aware, take some time to take note of the ideological trends that we're dealing with right now. But also, let's remember, like, a lot of this faux spirituality, it's came up with the hippie movement, right? The hippie movement was a part of COINTELPRO. It was a direct response to the formation of revolutionary movements, right? The drug culture associated with it, the way it funneled people away from revolutionary organizations. What we're seeing today is simply a continuation of that, and it's important to keep that in mind.
And okay, just one last thing too about while we're talking about that real quick, because like something I learned in the last year was how people actually take spirituality, especially detribalized people, will take spirituality and merge it with the political when they don't fucking belong together. Like the like the merging of spirituality and the political in the leftist spaces is only going to endanger us.
It's entirely inappropriate, especially
entirely inappropriate
when it's people who don't know what they're talking about.
People who are detribalized and people who, oh man, like, do that shit at home and then go to the protest. Like, I don't know what to say, man. And I've actually had to like come out and say, like, like the Red Nation isn't on that kind of bullshit. Like, there's times we need medicine, but that's not in the same political space at all. They are completely separate spaces, and they should remain so.
And we do this to protect ourselves
And others.
Yeah, literally. It's literally for your safety. This is for your safety. It's for your safety. It's for your safety.
It's everybody's safety, man. Like, you just can't be going around fucking with shit. You can't be fucking with shit like that. And that's ultimately like where all of this comes from. It's just people fucking with shit.
Mm-hmm.
So don't do that.
Hey, cut it out.
Knock it off.
That's what you get.
That man's gonna get you.
Hey. Okay, cut it. That's perfect. Now stop it.
Hold on.
Okay.
To hear more anti sounds, tune in to our Patreon for bonus material. Just kidding. Where we'll have greatest hits such as
such as hey, knock it off.
And who can forget the classic?
Damn it.
G.
G. No, what's another good anti sound?
Bingo.
Ne-e.
Winnicky.
Okay, it's madness. It's madness. We'll get some Navajo ones too.
Tune in next week. But on the real, please support our media work. Thank you so much for keeping a roof over the Red Nation podcast. If you would like to support the show, please go to the Red Media Patreon. And you can support us for as low as $2 a month, for as much as I think $10,000 a month. We're still waiting on someone.
Leonardo DiCaprio.
Come through. And yeah, that's the best way to support us. Red Media produces the Red Nation podcast, and the Red Nation provides the analysis, provides the comrades. So we'll get this to our producer, and this will air on Monday thanks to viewers and comrades and supporters like you. All right. Thank you.